Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your daily sit rep for Thursday, the 29th of January, 2026. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. We are barreling right through this year. Hard to believe the first month's almost over. With that, good morning, Robert. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway. Lots to cover here, starting with, I think it was Axios and Politico. I've seen they've been talking about Democrats are leery about the Insurrection Act, and I was actually reading an interview that was done with Minnesota Governor Waltz. I think it was published yesterday, and he's asking, "Oh, is Minneapolis going to be the next Fort Sumter?" And he said, "We certainly do not want to get to armed political violence." He said, "We don't want a civil war," but he did ask and leave it open ended. Are we going to get one? So, Insurrection Act maybe is one trigger for that. So, what's the latest?
It came out yesterday that Senator Adam Schiff, a California Democrat, is leading a Democrat Insurrection Act working group in the Senate. And the idea behind this group is they would coordinate messaging, coordinate floor action in the Senate, potential resolutions, and legal support efforts. An Axios source said that this working group has actually been preparing for President Trump to use the Insurrection Act for months now.
Mm-hmm. Robert, previously I said I think the Insurrection Act is unlikely prior to the midterms. I was saying that last year. I continue to say that. Everything that I've seen from President Trump, he likes talking about the Insurrection Act. He's talked about it before. Lots of Republicans are talking about it. I have not seen any willingness yet on his part or any kind of overt sign that says he wants to do it before the midterms. I'm sure a lot of this has to do with actual on the ground. Like he would need some trigger event, like organized political violence. I think maybe there's some concern about whether what was happening in Minneapolis rises to the level of insurrection. And I mean, sure, you can look at a simple definition and say, well, yes, this is an insurrection, but there's a legal definition that I think maybe the White House is somewhat concerned about. Obviously there's maybe some political fallout here. In your estimation, does it look, and also just let me say this, we've talked a lot about which Trump are you going to get on this? Are you going to get Taco Trump or are you going to get Operation Midnight Hammer Trump? You're going to get Maduro Trump. And he's capable of both. I just have not seen anything overt from the White House or from President Trump telling me to expect Midnight Hammer Trump in Minneapolis. And it seems like it's a lot less likely now. So in your estimation, has anything changed on whether or not we see an Insurrection Act prior to the midterms?
No, I don't think we will, especially just this morning. White House Board Czar Tom Homan was saying that they are cooperating. And I think that the previous messaging from the Trump administration about the Insurrection Act was to put pressure on Minnesota officials.
Mm-hmm. And also, Governor Waltz there in Minnesota also said that he's been having some good discussions with Tom Homan. And, he said Greg Bovino never called him. Kristi Noem, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, never called him. And now all of a sudden he's having these phone calls with Tom Homan and things are working a little bit better. And also we should just say, just talking to some ICE agents on the ground in Minneapolis, all of them have said, we're not going anywhere. We're continuing to carry out immigration enforcement operations. We've seen lots of videos and social media coverage of that. So we did not get Taco Trump on Minneapolis. ICE is still there continuing the mission. Anything to add there, Robert, before we move on?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, please continue then.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries advised congressional Democrats not to travel to Minnesota earlier this week to support anti-ICE protesters. There have already been a couple of Democrats that have gone there, like Senator Raphael Warnock from Georgia. He said that Democrats visiting Minnesota would put a strain on local resources, and he urged Democrats instead to participate in days of action in their home districts. Then moving over to the domestic side, yesterday we talked about Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner and a coordinating with district attorneys and prosecutors around the country. Well, they launched now what they're calling the Project for the Fight Against Federal Overreach, and this includes Krasner and 8 progressive local prosecutors from Arizona, Minnesota, Texas, Virginia. The idea behind this organization, according to Krasner, is that they're going to provide mutual support for local prosecutors who bring cases against the federal government. And he added that this will be a substantial tool against the normalization of fascism and attempt to overthrow democracy. This is the organization that Krasner hinted at yesterday. We've already seen Democrats coordinate legal strategy nationwide in a lot of these lawsuits in the first year of the second Trump administration. What I expect to see out of this group is providing, when they say providing mutual support, they're likely talking about providing investigative assistance and coordinating legal strategy. And I expect there will be more local prosecutors that do sign up to this. I think it is likely that Krasner and these other prosecutors involved, like Mary Moriarty out of Minneapolis, are actively recruiting other local prosecutors to join this organization. And moving on to Washington and Oregon, both Washington State and Oregon are considering anti-mask bills. Washington Governor Bob Ferguson said that the state Senate has already passed the bill. It's moving to their state assembly and then to his desk. I think the likely outcome here is it's going to turn out like California's anti-mask bill. The Trump administration sued over that bill at late last year, and their Attorney General Rob Bonta told the federal courts that they had no intention of actually enforcing it against federal agents. I expect the same outcome here. And then, speaking of California, there is a pair of bills being proposed that would introduce effectively additional taxes on any private contractor that provides support for ICE detention facilities or operates ICE detention facilities in the state, a 50% tax, and also would eliminate any state tax breaks for tech companies that provide contract services for ICE or CBP. I think the obvious intent here is to undermine the Trump administration's capacity for immigration enforcement, because there have been, in the last few months, the public release of multiple tech company contracts, including Palantir, and the idea here is to target the logistics of immigration enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Robert. And just on that note, I saw where Eric Prince posted yesterday, I believe. So Eric Prince, for those who don't know, former Blackwater guy, lots of people, lots of GWAT veterans, Global War on Terror veterans, are extremely pro Eric Prince. And if everyone will remember, back in 24, 25, he came up with this plan. I don't recall the specifics, but basically he said, look, we're going to be able to deport a lot of illegals, and it's going to be very cost effective. Robert, do you remember what it was like 100,000 or $500,000 or something a month, illegals, he said?
I don't remember the specifics.
Yeah, I don't remember, but it's way more than what we've seen. At least that's what he said his plan would do. At any rate, he came out and he said he most recently called for debanking of illegals, and I have seen a lot of calls for that. Like, why are illegals still getting driver's licenses? Why are they still able? And I understand there's a state level issue, 10th Amendment issue there, of course, but it does seem like the administration could be doing a lot more things to put pressure on illegal immigrants to get them to self-deport rather than just hanging around to be arrested. Robert, anything to add there before we move on?
Well, one of the things the Trump administration did do late last year, or announced that they're going to do, is start allowing banks to consider immigration status for loans and credit cards. That was one of the things that came out during the Biden administration, was that illegal immigrants were getting house loans, for example, or getting FHA loans or other types of federal housing assistance to buy homes. And the Biden administration put out one of those dear colleague letters saying that, well, if you look too hard at their immigration status, you might be breaking the law. The Trump administration has reversed that. So there is, I think, some recognition within the administration that there are moves that they can do that are not on the street enforcement. But I do think Eric Prince's criticism is correct, that there are other things they can do, like debanking. There are legal avenues they could take that they haven't yet.
Mm-hmm. All right, much more to come on that. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's move on now to the global sit rep. Jared, good morning.
Good
Let's start
morning.
off with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is the acting director of a whole lot of government institutions and the acting president of Venezuela, and maybe the acting Ayatollah of Iran here coming up maybe pretty soon, maybe not. But Jared, what's the latest here on this State Department restriction of TPS for Haitians?
So we're continuing to track the visa restrictions for the Haiti's Transitional Presidential Council. Just a reminder, this does seem to be following a course of action that the Trump administration has laid out previously. Visa restrictions, and then sanctions, and then presence, and then action. And this is because these people are, per the State Department, continuing to take steps to impose, they are enabling foreign terrorist organizations to destabilize Haiti, which goes directly against the national security strategy and now the new national defense strategy and the State Department Department agency strategy. So everybody's on the same page of we're going to not allow this. The State Department did promise to continue to take steps to prevent the further destabilization of Haiti and our hemisphere. There were a couple of very interesting things to come out of Rubio's hearing with the Senate as well. First off, he said that the U.S. government actually gave the interim Venezuelan government enough money to make payroll to prevent systemic collapse during Operation Absolute Resolve. That was the Maduro removal operation. So that explains a lot of what we've seen for why they're so on board right off the bat. Is basically they helped the system stay afloat for a minute.
Jared, please tell me that this is not taxpayer money, that this is oil money.
He did not clarify. Frankly, I would be willing to bet it's taxpayer money, just outright.
Well, let's look at the flip side of this, because we did export and try to sell how many ever millions of barrels of oil it was. I don't even remember how much, but the United States did have that money, and I'm not sure what they did with it. Hopefully it's just some of that money, but let's just I'm sure some investigative journalists can get down to the bottom of that. So sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
Yep. And actually, on the note of money, Rubio said that without the United States' involvement in NATO, Europe would actually have to again double its percentage of GDP on defense every year, up to 10%. And that would have to last for the next 20 years just to make up for their neglect. So I think this points to, the United States is not leaving NATO because it would cripple the European economies just outright. They would have to make such an enormous move on their spending. But also it does lay out for the Europeans how dire it can be the moment the U.S. actually does leave, if they were to leave and join China's sphere of influence. On the note of China, Taiwan announced that they've developed a list of over 1,900 Chinese vessels that are unofficially participating in China's Navy and Coast Guard drills around Taiwan. We've been covering those for the last few years. The Taiwanese Coast Guard is also developing methods to intercept the ships that are near underwater cables, and they're actively expanding their Coast Guard. They're adding additional commanders, which will have thousands of people below them as well. And lastly, Reuters, citing several Japanese fishermen and fisher organizations, says that the Japanese Coast Guard has actually been asking those organizations to leave the disputed islands with China. Now, Japan has previously permitted and even somewhat encouraged the fishermen to fish these waters as part of their sovereignty claims over these islands. And I think this is important because Japan is not backing down on their sovereignty claims whatsoever. We covered yesterday that the prime minister is doubling down on it. She will be involved in Taiwan. And Japan has previously drilled to remove civilians from their southern islands, these disputed islands, in preparation for war. I think this signals a concern from Japan that China may attack civilians soon, or that it's at least on the table. That obviously, as treaty allies, is very concerning, because that would be an act of war.
Yeah, but Jared, don't you think this would be something like a maritime militia or scenification maybe of these islands at a civilian level, and not like a traditional military style attack?
If this was somewhere like the South China Sea, I would be willing to put that there. But the area here is patrolled by the Chinese Coast Guard almost exclusively. You'll see Navy transit it, but the patrols are all Coast Guard. And the closest maritime militia that I'm aware of tend to be much closer to Taiwan than to these disputed islands.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's interesting. Let's talk about that after the show, and because it is concerning if that's what Japan believes, and it is what China is actually intending to do. So thanks for that update, Jared. All right, let's go ahead and move on here to our Homeland Ops brief. Robert, what's the latest? I saw where ICE is reportedly pulling out of Maine because Senator Collins, I guess, has a problem with immigration enforcement. And that was just a headline. I had not read the article. A, have you seen that? And B, what do you make of it?
Yes, it did. So Senator Susan Collins did say that Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem paused ICE, what she called ICE enhanced operations in Maine, and that there are no ongoing or planned large-scale ICE operations in the state. I think, well, there's two things going on here. One, Collins is one of the few Senate Republicans that are up for re-election this year. She's in a state that Kamala Harris won by 7 points, or it's between 7 and 8 points in 2024. I think this is a play for her re-election to shore up her seat. On the other side, she specifically said large scale, and Operation Catch of the Day was not large scale. Most of these surges are not large scale, definitely not compared to Minneapolis. So I think it is possible that Trump is reining in ICE operations in Maine, but I think it's probably a good idea to wait and see, because there are still reports on the ground of ICE agents spotted in different areas of Maine, including in Lewiston and Portland. And I forget the name of the city, but it's on the border with Canada. There have been ICE agents spotted there within the last 24 hours. And Collins originally announced that she had talked to Noam about this on Monday, though she didn't give any details, but she did announce that she had a talk with Noam. So it is possible that this is a political kind of semantic game going on here to help Collins shore up her Senate seat.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that.
And also this morning, there was Board Czar Tom Homan's press conference in Minneapolis right before the show. In this press conference, he said that Minnesota officials have agreed to cooperate with ICE detainers, and there are already some local governments that are complying with these detainers. So they are notifying ICE and CBP of any illegal alien criminals who are pending release. He also said that Attorney General Keith Ellison agreed to allow Minnesota county jails to notify ICE of these pending releases. Homan said that ICE is going to return to targeted strategic enforcement operations and prioritize public safety threats, though he did say that this is not a, quote, surrender of President Trump's larger immigration agenda. I think there's two things going on here. One, I think there is because there's been even Republican pushback on immigration enforcement. I think this is a public signaling, or specifically to say, well, we're only going after the worst of the worst, which is what they have been messaging on since the beginning of the administration. Like whenever DHS releases one of these pages with booking photos, they always say the worst of the worst. But the data shows that they're also doing a lot of collateral arrests. They are also on the ground reports that they're doing a lot of collateral arrests, and I don't expect that to stop. He also said that they are not planning to roll back Metro Surge unless this cooperation continues. So that right now it looks like the roughly 3,000 federal agents are going to remain until it looks like Minnesota officials are actually going to continue following through with this. Also, Reuters originally reported about this, that they were going to only target criminal aliens, and that they were also told not to interact with anti-ICE agitators. I think right now the Trump administration's focus in Minneapolis is to tamp down on some of the public attention on interactions between ICE and anti-ICE rapid response groups. A big focus of this right now is the White House reportedly wants to avoid a shutdown on Friday. And I think he's trying to set up the public appearance that he is only focusing on the criminal illegal aliens, to take away any kind of public pressure Democrats can have to force a shutdown or force them to put legislative oversight and restrictions on ICE operations.
Right. Well, thanks for that great update, Robert. I appreciate you staying on top of this. All right, let's move on and talk about the last item in today's report before we get to questions. By the way, we have put the registration link over. If you're watching this morning's briefing over on the Forward Observer site, we do have a new website that is coming out here like the next couple of weeks. We're in the process of beta testing. If you would please register for an account there, and obviously please don't share it outside of Forward Observer members. Let's test out the site and then get it deployed. We have our watch floor up and running, so we do have some real-time feeds up, and we'll continue to build those out, and then and go from big picture, national, strategic, down to more and more local, state and county, and eventually hyper-local. All right. And then maybe after tomorrow's show, if you want to stick around, maybe I'll do a walkthrough with everyone. So if you do want to register for that beta testing account over on the new website, and we'll go through and I'll show you the bells and whistles. All right. With that, As always, please put your questions in the chat. Let's talk about this latest color revolution update here. Over the past couple of days, we've seen dozens of CEOs of Fortune 500, Fortune 50 and higher companies, corporations, including 3M and United Health and Target, sign these letters calling for an immediate de-escalation of tensions in Minnesota, and specifically Minneapolis. And this happened before this deal was cut between President Trump and Governor Walz. I also noticed on Wednesday, Apple CEO Tim Cook also urged de-escalation in a memo that he circulated among employees. As I continued to read different articles about this, it turns out that employees at some of these major companies reportedly circulated their own letters demanding their CEOs speak out against ICE and immigration enforcement in Minneapolis. And if you know anything about how a color revolution functions, if you understand the mechanisms, the levers that get pulled, this is extremely important. I do want to point out, first, neither of these letters that these CEOs signed weighed in into politics or condemned federal law enforcement. They were pretty middle of the line. They're weighing in more or less on a social issue, not a necessarily political issue. And they did just call for general de-escalation, which would apply to both sides. But it does show that these executives are willing to weigh into social issues here. And this is important if you're a coordinator or strategist of this burgeoning color revolution. It's important for two reasons. First, it shows that employees at these companies either do or may have influence over the actions of their CEOs. When you have hundreds or thousands of employees signing these letters, basically a demand letter, demanding their CEO speak out against some issue, that is very significant. This remember, most color revolutions coincide with national level elections. And so what this says to me is that you can say it's indivisible or 50-51 or any of the myriad groups out there who are trying to organize this stuff. What it says to me is that we are going to see a concerted effort here by employees at these corporations to pressure their CEOs into making comments about the election outcome. Remember, I think what we're probably looking at here, and there is a chance that we see a color revolution, the decisive phase of a color revolution executed prior to the 2028 election. And that's November 28 all the way through January 29 because of the transition. But anyway, that's like the danger zone. Okay, that's like the black zone, basically. And so if there's a color revolution that does coincide with the election, it will almost certainly challenge or contest the election results, declare if a MAGA candidate wins, whether that's J.D. Vance or whomever it may be, declare them illegitimate, say Trump stole the election for this person or Trump conspired with the states to steal the election. Therefore, J.D. Vance or the Republican is the illegitimate president-elect. And at the point that they can make the public believe that the elected president-elect is illegitimate, the logical conclusion is that they need to be deposed and replaced with the legitimate victor, who would in this case be the Democrat. Remember, if a Democrat wins the 28 election, there will be no color revolution. There's no need to. And that's also a big thing. You know, I know a lot of people are talking about insurgency and they're building this insurgency on the left. And yes, we do see a lot of insurgent style behavior. I'm not ready to call it an insurgency quite yet. However, we're dealing with two separate groups here as well. And when I talk about color revolution, this is an effort by the establishment left, like the deep state, establishment progressive left, former State Department, former CIA, former national security, basically the globalists. When we talk about insurgency, we're not talking about the establishment left. We're talking about typically it's going to be the far left. And so, in just one point on this, and I'm kind of digressing, and we'll move on. But remember, an insurgency is a violent, protracted conflict to overthrow a government, basically to seize or challenge political control of an area. On average, they last 10 years. Ain't nobody got time for that. No one wants to go fight. Relatively very few people want to go fight an insurgency for 10 years before they win. And there is no guarantee of win. Roughly 50%, and maybe actually a little bit less than 50% of insurgencies are successful. On the flip side, a color revolution, the decisive phase of a color revolution is over in weeks to months. And you can build a color revolution under the auspices of free speech because it's just protest. And then it's just resistance. And you actually don't have to necessarily cross that line into what could be called sedition until you build this movement large enough. So I just want to keep that in mind. In terms of if you're trying to seize political control of Washington, D.C., you're not going to do it through an insurgency. You have a much better chance, a far better chance. And we can go back to, if you include all of the color revolutions, including the classic color revolutions, the quasi color revolutions, and then the the edge cases of color revolutions, they've got a 78% success rate all time. So that's far better than less than 50%. And they're far quicker, and it's done with a lot less human suffering and also a lot less risk. So that's another reason why I continue to 100% believe we are facing down a color revolution, probably in 2028. And so I look at this, the CEO letters and employees writing their own letters and signing their own letters, demanding their CEOs get involved. And if these CEOs are willing to do it for Minneapolis, they may be willing to do it and challenge in support of challenging the election results or contesting the election results if a Republican gets elected. And if there is some credible evidence, and it doesn't even have to be credible, it has to be the perception of credible evidence that the 28 election was stolen. And so I want to direct your attention here to the regime's pillars of support. This is directly from the color revolutionary doctrine. Just some quick background. I watched this training video. This is from Indivisible, which is the country's largest protest organizing group. They are the spearhead of this burgeoning color revolution. And this is not something that they advertise or say outright. But you sit through their training and you look at the terms that they're using, and this is just straight out of Gene Sharp Color Revolution playbook. If it walks like a duck, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a color revolution. At least they're building the movement. And as soon as they started talking about the 6 pillars of support, I was reading a book about the very first classic color revolution in Serbia in 2000. And they talked about the 6 pillars, the 6 pillars of support for a regime. And I said, this is the people in the United States are talking about the exact same playbook and strategy that was used in the very first classic color revolution in 2000 in Serbia. It's the same playbook. It's a color revolution. So when we look at these letters from CEOs and we look at activism, encouraging employees of these major corporations, maybe they go on strike. Maybe they say the CEO needs to publicly contest the election result or publicly support the Democrat who according to them rightly won the election, or we're going to go on strike. And they may go on strike anyway, because strikes are a core part of color revolutionary tactics. The question is, will the employees of these corporations be able to influence their CEOs to offer their support, offer what's called legitimacy to the left in this contested election scenario? And it appears like that's probably a very important line of effort for them to do. The first 2 pillars of this are business and labor. This is exactly what we're talking about. Corporations and small businesses and labor, the employees. These are the pillars of society that a color revolution erodes in order to reduce support for a government, whether that's authoritarian or autocratic or small d democratic, even Republican, small r Republican. So when I see letters from CEOs weighing in on Minneapolis, for me, the logical conclusion is, what are they going to comment on about the election? If there's a significant reason, or if there's this belief that's conditioned. Remember, if what was it Goebbels that said, if you say a lie enough times, it becomes the truth. A big part of this color revolutionary movement is conditioning certain beliefs in the American populace, among elites, among institutions like business leader and labor leaders and faith leaders and education leaders, and within the civil service, and of course within military and police. And the strategy is here: if you erode these pillars' support for the Trump administration or for the government or for the president-elect or whoever, if you start to erode these pillars, this whole building is going to crash down on itself. And that's the color revolution strategy. So I won't beat a dead horse. I will just say this is extremely interesting to me that these CEOs are writing letters about Minneapolis, because today it's Minneapolis, or this week it's Minneapolis, in November 28, December 28, January 29. It could be in support of a Democrat candidate who is contesting the election. With that, I think we do have some questions. Jared, if you could please go ahead and tee those up. Do you think in 6+ years, attacks on government illegitimacy could lead to dual sovereignty and a high intensity conflict in America, like split civil institutions along ideological lines? Well, listen, one reason why I continue to say, and I'm saying this from the perspective of the establishment left here. One reason why you would support a color revolution is because it's pretty swift, and there may be some temporary economic damage. It will not be permanent, like strikes. People will go back to work. You'll have some lost productivity, some lost profits, some economic dislocation. It is not nearly as destructive as a 10-year-long insurgency. In insurgencies, critical infrastructure tends to get destroyed. Power, water, internet, lines of communication, transportation, all the critical infrastructure that makes our world spin tends to get turned off by the insurgents. It is incredibly economically destructive. If you're a member of the establishment elite, you do not want that to happen. You want to basically cut the head off the snake. You want to decapitate whoever's in DC and take over. And that's exactly how these color revolutions function. So I would say that's another thing. Now, in terms of dual sovereignty, maybe we do, maybe we don't. Maybe we do have a period of several months or longer, 6, 12 months. I don't know how long it's going to take, where you have competing claims to the presidency. And when you say dual sovereignty, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, maybe that could mean like a few different things. But yes, there may be 1/3 of America, 40, 50% on either side, claiming that their candidate or the other is the legitimate president. So that's obviously a very important scenario that would obviously divide the country. You talk about split civil institutions. You know, the military, I guess the CJCS, I don't know. We'll kind of cross that bridge when we get there. But yes, there will obviously be all of these pillars. Jared, can you bring that pillar map back up, please? Whether you're, and let's just say, and this is just a scenario, okay? Let's just say for the sake of argument is J.D. Vance, okay? J.D. Vance wins the Electoral College in 2028, and it is being actively contested by, let's just say, Gavin Newsom, who may run for president in 28. And this is just for the scenario. The question on either side is, how do you get these 6 institutions to support your claim to legitimacy? Legitimacy is the recognized right to be in charge. President Trump is legitimate because he won the Electoral College. He also won the popular vote. He is the legitimate president. No one can credibly, or certainly not authoritatively, say that he is an illegitimate president. Even people don't like him say, yeah, he's the president. That's called legitimacy. So whether you're Vance or whether you're Newsom, your goal, and certainly it's the color revolutionaries, the strategists, the coordinators of this, to take control of the 6 pillars and line them up in support of their candidate. Because at the point where you have major business leaders like Fortune 500, Fortune 50 CEOs calling on J.D. Vance to leave D.C., they said They say we believe you're illegitimately elected. It was an illegal election, and we are supporting Gavin Newsom. And this is just a scenario. And then, of course, you have the labor unions line up and say that same thing. And then you have faith institutions say that same thing, pastors and imams and rabbis and whatever else is out there. And you obviously have education. That pillar's been captured. And then you have members of the civil service. So people within your own government saying J.D. Vance is not an illegal president. And then you have members of police, generals, all the way down to colonels and captains, and then all levels of law enforcement, but certainly DC police and federal law enforcement, state law enforcement, maybe even down to local law enforcement. You want these institutions, you want these pillars to support you and reject the other guy. That is legitimacy. And ultimately, they don't have to fight a 10-year-long violent conflict to take over. They just contest the election. They get these 6 pillars lined up behind them. And with enough pressure, political, social, and economic pressure, they become the next president. That's how color revolutions work. So I hope I answered your question. In terms of a high-intensity conflict, we're talking about Russia, Ukraine, World War II, actual force-on-force, conventional, large-scale combat operations, conventional warfare. I still don't think it's likely. I do not think that we will see that. It's not impossible. But heretofore, as of right now, I don't think that's a likely outcome. Thanks for your question. Jared, next question. With the current unrest in Minnesota and other blue states, is this a question of genetics, as these areas are hotbeds of? I don't think it's genetics. I think it's ideology. I think they're just communists. Next question. Is the only way to save our republic to lose its provided freedoms first, become more totalitarian? Yeah. I don't know, man. Or excuse me, ma'am. I don't know. The risk, if you're the Trump administration, is, I was in a group chat last night and we were talking about this. Have we passed the point of no return? Will DC be able to go back to the status quo, no matter how ugly and corrupt it is? Will the next administration, whoever that is, be able to go back to some level of normalcy? Is that even preferable at this point? I guess is a follow-up question. Or have we already passed the point of no return and we just have not realized it yet? And I think it is more likely than not, there is no going back to the status quo. I think we probably have passed the point of no return. Are we on the other side of the Rubicon? I don't know. It doesn't seem like we've had a very decisive Rubicon moment, but this is something like maybe we've been waiting so slowly that we're already on to the other side and we just don't recognize it yet. As an analyst, as someone who's even keel, who tries to be very objective about this stuff, because I care about being right and I care about perceiving things accurately, it's difficult for me to say. But I think we're more likely than not past the point of no return, which does obviously not bode well for the future. So hope that answers your question, Bad Wab. But I don't know. There's so many. We'll move on. Maybe we'll answer your question during a different time. Any possibility that with Waltz cooperating with the federal government, that the revolutionary left might attempt to take control of the anti-ICE resistance from the establishment left? Well, right now we're seeing both. We're seeing far left activity and also just the establishment, run-of-the-mill, indivisible 50-51, just the progressive activist army. I think the far left I think they want nothing more than to take control of the movement, but I don't think they're going to be able to wrestle it away. We saw this in LA with Mayor Karen Bass and Governor Newsom in California. We saw this in Minneapolis, Minnesota. All these Democrat leaders who are not on the far left, they are in fact establishment. Even they have urged calm and nonviolence. And that's something in this interview that I was reading this morning with Waltz. Even he said, pushed for nonviolence. And I understand that some people may say, well, of course they say that, but they don't actually mean that. And I think by and large, they do mean that. There may come a time when when they change their tune. But as for right now, I don't think any of these people want anything other than nonviolent action. So I think maybe the far left could try. I don't see it being successful. Next question. The intro music is, what did someone say? Armed by 2050? We get that question a lot. I should probably just answer it. It's called Armed. Next question. The US dollar has been disproportionately impacted by the surge in gold compared to other safe haven currencies. What are your thoughts on this, and where is this headed? Well, it's funny because I've been tracking Goldman Sachs gold price projections for the past couple of years, and they're hitting their goals way beyond what consider this. Goldman Sachs last October, November published their end of year price prediction for gold at $4,900. And just last week, they increased that to like 54, 5,500. I don't even know where gold is this morning. The silver thing is partially driven by silver shortage. I expect silver is not going to continue to go up forever. Obviously, I think it probably will come down. I don't know to what level, but once that supply dislocation works itself out, silver prices will probably come down. Now for gold, I don't know, but I will just say, you look at central banks loading up on gold, India, Russia, China, central banks all around the world buying lots of gold. They're doing that for security. And have we hit a new line of support? I mean, I make of this, what I make of it is, we look at certain metrics when we talk about the dollar. It's like, what percentage of exchange trade settlements are done in dollars? And it's like 85, 88% last time I saw. Okay. That's dollar dominance. The share of dollar in global bank reserves has been coming down, but it's still like 47% or something like that, which is still a plurality. It's no longer a majority, but it's still a plurality of on average currencies held. But and that's just currencies. But when you start to look at gold as a percentage of foreign bank reserves, central bank reserves, I think it is becoming clear they are diversifying out of the dollar and they are loading up on gold. So I think that is significant. We'll leave it there for now. Next question. With ICE being drawn in multiple states now, is this a loss? And will this summer heat up due to the left's win? The administration is starting to look like Bush years with more radical Democrats. Well, Robert, you and I have discussed this. I'm not actually so sure that this is necessarily a loss. I don't think Minneapolis is a loss for President Trump, but certainly in states like Maine, and this may be a political concession to Susan Collins, of course, even though Susan Collins is obviously not a reliable Trump supporter, she's probably still far preferable to a Democrat. What do you make of this? Let's just start with this first question. Do you think some of these ICE drawdowns in these states, do you think that's a loss for the administration?
I don't think so far. I don't think so far there has been a drawdown. So Homan said that they have not redeployed. The only person that's been redeployed out of Minneapolis was Bovino. He said this morning that they are maintaining Operation Metro Surge as it is today until basically Minnesota officials prove that they are actually going to follow through with these agreements with the ICE detainers. The main one, there's still reports. There's been reports within the last 24 hours of ICE agents on the ground. And it wasn't that large to begin with. So I don't think there's actually a drawdown. I think there are some semantic games being played here, especially with the Collins thing about no large scale. She specifically said no large scale ICE operations. Most of these are not large scale. Under the Operation at Large banner, a lot of these have been in the low hundreds. In many, I think like San Francisco, the aborted San Francisco surge last year was only going to be 100 CBP agents. So I think most of these are already smaller scale. Also, and with the Homan's statements about focusing on a criminal nexus, the Trump administration has never not said that. I think this is signaling for public consumption here, specifically that to tell the public, hey, we're not just going door to door and rounding up everyone. We are focusing on people with a criminal nexus, but they've maintained that the whole time. I don't really, to me, that doesn't look like a major signal that there is a drawdown actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Robert, I would say I'm not seeing that either or hearing that from ICE agents. Also, let's look ahead to the summer. Will the summer heat up due to the left's win or maybe what they perceive? I'll tell you, the left-wing protesters we saw in Minneapolis do not think this is a win for them. They're out there protesting against Governor Walz for this deal.
And getting arrested, by the way, by local police.
Yes, and getting arrested. And also HSI published a bunch of basically booking photos, like capture photos, lining these people up like they're cartel leaders and publishing their names. Also, Pam Bondi published their names and photographs on X. And there are some people weighing into the legality or constitutionality of that. I don't know. I'm not an attorney, but I will tell you this certainly, it seems to be a deterring effect. If you are a leftist and you do not want to get arrested and have your name and photograph published on the internet for millions of people to see, and of course there are true believers who do not care, but otherwise, I think it does have a deterring effect on some of these people from my perspective. Not, of course, not all of them, but some of the people who are maybe not as ideologically committed. And if you're the Trump administration, that's a good thing. You want to start to pare down the level of support and certainly the level of active support or active involvement in civil unrest. And, what I think heretofore probably is organized resistance. What do you make of that?
This is one place where I think the Trump administration had been weak previously, was the messaging of a lot of this stuff for public consumption. Bondi is apparently on the ground in Minneapolis doing this, supervising these arrest operations. I think they said they've arrested, just since she got there a couple of days ago, 16 activists for interfering with federal operations. This also follows what Holman proposed in that interview we covered yesterday of publicizing the activists that are arrested for interfering or impeding with ICE agents. I think the strategy here is that even if they do not have final convictions, because that has been very common, where they'll arrest people, either drop the charges because they don't think they're going to get convictions because of local juries or local judges. I think the strategy is to deter the casual protesters from entering that activist pipeline, because, like you said, for activists and especially for far left people, this could be seen as giving them street cred effectively. But for the casual protesters that show up to the No Kings protests or the non-disruptive or non-direct action demonstration protests in Minneapolis, getting arrested and having your face put on DHS's website could be life-changing for these people. And I think that is having a deterrent, or intended to, and likely having a deterrent effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. That is what we're seeing there probably. All right. A quick question here from Matt: is your account automatically linked via email? Listen, it will be in the future. Once we move the user database over, you'll just log in with your normal login and you'll have access to the new site. For now, you do have to register for a new account, for an actual beta testing account. And then we'll move everyone over, and then you'll just use your normal Ford Observer login for now. Jared, quick question. Earlier this week, we talked about, and if it's every so often, if Xi Jinping doesn't make a public statement for like a few days, people start saying, oh, has he been cooped? Is he sick? Is he dying? Is he dead? There was a rumor going around of an attempted some sort of coup. There was an alleged firefight between these general forces and the CCP's forces. Can you provide any clarification or context for those rumors?
So there was a rumor that there was fighting in Beijing yesterday. That was dismissed by, first off, all of the information here that I'm trying to sift through is either somebody who's very pro CCP or very anti CCP. So trying to take into account biases. The very pro one said, no, hey, this video is from December. You can hear them say it's in December. This is fireworks. So it wasn't a fight in Beijing. Nobody has countered the claim that there are troops moving into Beijing, though. That's been, that is still out there saying, hey, there are troops there, and those troops are technically supposed to be on a lockdown. They're not supposed to be moving. There are a few pre-scheduled exercises that are still going forward. Xi Jinping, from what I can tell, is not under any kind of arrest or apparent duress. He is still meeting with heads of state. He's meeting with Keir Starmer probably right now, actually.
Right.
That said, there have not been the statements of support that we do normally see. So, like I said, or I think it was on Monday when the news broke, I am very concerned that there are People's Liberation Army factions that will not remain loyal to to Xi. They will be loyal to Zhang, who was arrested, and there will be firefights. And from what I've heard, for the actual firefights that happened, it was between the People's Armed Police Forces and other police forces versus People's Liberation Army during the arrest. That would make sense instead of having a divide within the military itself. There's a lot going on. I promise I am trying every day to figure out what exactly is going on, because if stuff kicks off inside of China internally, basically all of our worst predictions on what happens to the supply chain goes right through the roof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thanks for staying on top of that, Jared. And it is very, very concerning, obviously. All right. We do have just a few other questions here about color revolutions here. What are counter color revolution options, or is it just batten down the hatches situation to keep your powder? Well, listen, anytime you're in any form of low intensity conflict, and color revolution is a form of low intensity conflict. So that's conflict beneath the threshold of conventional war. So we're not talking about tanks and bombers. This is not large scale combat operations, but low intensity conflict is above routine peaceful competition. So we're not just in an election against each other. There's political warfare going on. So this includes things like, and it's not just dirty tricks. I mean, there's actually violent social movements, all forms of political warfare, color revolutions, terrorism, obviously insurgency and counterinsurgency. Those are all forms of low intensity conflict, as opposed to like World War II type high intensity conflict. Being that we're in low intensity conflict, typically not always, but typically there are phases. And you can there's a 3-phase, there's a 5-phase, and color revolutions kind of have their own phase that mimic very closely the phases of insurgency. And so whenever you're in that, first of all, you have to identify what phase you're in, and that really kind of determines your tactics. So everything we try to do in counter color revolution is trying to counter what they're actively trying to do. At a strategic big picture level, that those 6 pillars there, if you're a color revolutionary, a strategist, an NGO, a coordinator, whatever we're going to call these people, your goal is to erode those institutions' support for the existing government. That detracts from their legitimacy. And remember, everything rests on legitimacy, capability, and authority. And if it doesn't matter if you're an insurgent, you're a member of an organized resistance, you are a color revolutionary at some level, maybe you're part of all 3. You want to undermine legitimacy, capacity, and authority of your target. In this case, it would be the Trump administration. So to counter this, we obviously want to reduce their own capacity, their own capability to erode that support. So we have to bolster our own support among those 6 pillars. So we have to keep institutional support. We've got to keep elite support for the administration, maintain legitimacy, which is absolutely critical. So the administration can't be doing things that are popularly seen as illegitimate, at least not sustainably. And so, yes, there are some things that we could and should be doing. I'm going to have to dedicate an entire show to this out front with Mike Shelby. I was going to try to do it earlier this week, but I've been in meetings most of the time. I will get to this, and I will go over exactly what you can be doing. But in general, we are in the organizational phase. Or if you want to use the term latent and incipient, we're in the very first phase. So if they are organizing, which they still are organizing support, and of course we have seen some toe dipping into the waters here. I think they are trying to move this year into the second phase of the color revolution, which is resistance or organized resistance. But typically, if they're in the organizational phase, your mission is to counter-organize against them. And you've basically got at least in theory, you counter-organize the middle against them before they counter-organize the middle against you. So a lot of this stuff is information operations and narrative. And this is why this is why the left wants to control all the major media outlets. This is why they're trying to ban X and drive Elon Musk into bankruptcy and target all his businesses and give control of X back over to someone else. Is because the people who control the narrative, or people who control the means of narrative production, to use a modified Marxist term, if you control the means of narrative production, then you can control the narrative. And the narrative is so very important this is basically a shaping operation. You are shaping the battlefield, even if we're talking about shaping the information battlefield, or in fifth generation warfare, shaping the psychological or the cognitive battlefield against your adversary. So that's one thing that everyone should be thinking about is, how do I counter organize against what they're trying to do? Figure out what they're trying to target and then counter organize against it. And yeah, some of this is kind of reactionary. It's like, it does not exactly give you, I'd say right now, I think the left probably does have the initiative here in most instances. At any rate, this is going to take an hour to explain. But what I'd like to do is give you like 5 to 10 things that you could be doing right now, not just at like a 30,000 foot level, which is what we've been talking about, but at the tactical level, like the 100 foot or 500 foot level for you and your community. And I've talked about it a lot on Out Front with Mike Shelby, and we will continue. All right. Yes, in the modern era, it's like 47 to 50% or something like that of insurgencies, or maybe that may actually be post 1945 insurgencies. It is somewhere around the 50% mark. All right, we're running out of time here, so I'll do 2 quick questions. We'll save the rest for tomorrow. Are we in a civil war? Sure feels like it. Well, one reason why I really dislike the term civil war and don't use it is because it's very vague, and that conjures up a lot of different ideas and visions depending on who you are. When I talk about civil war, we're looking at 4 prerequisites. 4 things have to be present in order for there to be a civil war. And there's this book right here called Resort to Arms, which I think they probably have the absolute best definition of civil war. Those 4 things are it has to include the government as a belligerent. So 2 gangs fighting against each other would obviously not be a civil war. It has to involve the government. It has to involve the military, active components of the U.S. military. So deploying the National Guard would not be a civil war. Active use of the military. Number 3, it cannot. There has to be there has to be sustained casualties on both sides. So a genocide would not be a civil war. But if you had 2 sides shooting back at each other, it would be a civil war. And then number 3, and this is kind of the most tenuous of the 4, but the last one is you have to have 1,000 combat related deaths in a calendar year. And I say it's tenuous because I don't know where they picked that number from, but it's like, if you have 990 combat related deaths in any 12-month period, that's not a civil war, but 1,000 would be. So there's obviously some gray area there, but I think the underall point is that you have to have actual combat related deaths, like sustained combat related deaths in a civil war. If you're missing one of those 4 things, I think many academics will say it is not a civil war. And so people have their own definitions, and that's fine. If you want to say we're in a civil war, yeah, maybe. I've been saying for the past 10 years that we're obviously not in a hot war, but a cold war, maybe a hot peace. I don't know what you want to call it. We're in the gray zone between war and peace. And that space between war and peace is not empty. It's low intensity conflict. That's why I've studied this topic for so long, because we're going to be stuck here for a long time, and we have been. So no, I don't think we're in a civil war. Whether we descend into a civil war, it's certainly possible. Let's wait and see what happens with the 28 elections. I don't think it's going to happen before then. It could. I would just say it's more likely than not to. I'd say it's unlikely until at least the 28 elections. And I would just say this too. This will be the last question. We'll wrap up. We are headed for not just a financial crisis and not just an economic crisis, but obviously also a monetary crisis. And you go back and you read Ray Dalio's, all of his books on big debt crises, which is a fantastic book. His most recent one was published last year. It's called How Countries Go Broke. And he said, Ray Dalio is the founder of Bridgewater Associates, which was for a long time the world's largest. It may still be. And for a very long, like years and years, the world's most successful hedge funds. So this is a guy who made himself billions of dollars betting with other people's money. And that is an industry where performance is measurable. And if you're not very good at your job, you don't last very long in most cases. In 2016, back in Davos, the World Economic Forum, he started talking about the prospects of a U.S. civil war. And I'm not sure whether he meant that by the prerequisites or the definition that I gave you earlier, or just in general, some domestic armed conflict. But he said broadly, it's breaking down between capitalists and socialists. 2020, if we have an economic and financial crisis prior to 2028, maybe we will, maybe we won't, I don't know. But we eventually will. And I think there's a good chance that how we emerge from that, or that next election, will probably be a referendum. I'll just say it may be a referendum. Words means things. Probably means above 50%. May is, possibly beneath 50%, but higher than, say, 25, 30%. It may be a referendum on capitalism versus socialism. And this is not just an argument about whether we give some government program $5 million or $6 million. This is not a difference in flavor. This is a difference in kind. Project 2029, the stuff that Democrats are talking about, reshaping the government, expanding and stacking the Supreme Court, granting statehood to D.C. and Puerto Rico, to stack the Senate. Those are things, abolishing the Electoral College. I mean, you've seen all the stuff that they've been talking about for years and years now. All that stuff is going to fundamentally remake the government. Amnesty is another thing. So, an amnesty, as Democrats want it, would obviously flip deep red states like Texas blue, or at least purple, but probably blue. And I don't see 30% of America saying, well, these guys got elected, so I guess we're going to be socialists now. Well, these guys got elected, I guess our political party is going to be permanently locked out of power. Oh, these guys got elected, I guess they get to fundamentally transform the country. I don't see 20 to 30% of America being okay with that. And so I think that poses the highest risk of what you might call traditional, or what you would call traditional civil war, but certainly low intensity conflict. And, all that stuff that I've been talking about, I'm not pulling it out of thin air. They've actually been talking about that stuff. We know that's at least some of what some of them want to do that. So we'll leave it there. Other than, I'll just close on this. Local networking, local intelligence. Someone said beans, bullets, Band-Aids, and all that stuff. Yeah, of course, all that stuff matters. Local intelligence is an enabler of everything that you want at the local level. If you do not have local intelligence, you're not going to be able to do the things that you want to do. That's why I spend so much time talking about how to develop local intelligence. So I wrote the Area Intelligence Handbook, and I've got this new edition coming out. I don't have a release date, but it's in progress. Kind of got sidetracked by all this ICE stuff, unfortunately. It comes down to three things: doing your area study, building your local intelligence network, and building real-time intelligence gathering capacity. If you can do those things, you can drive operations. You can make good security decisions. You can make good preparedness decisions. You can respond to emergencies, whether they're natural disasters or horrors beyond human comprehension. If you don't have local intelligence, you're not winning an insurgency. You're not winning a color revolution. You're not winning any form of low-intensity conflict. So we'll leave it there for now. This is stuff I talk about frequently on Out Front with Mike Shelby. I try to do one a week. If you haven't seen them, head over to YouTube and just search Out Front with Mike Shelby. They're on there. All right, with that, everyone, thanks so much for watching. We still have a lot of questions. We will get to them tomorrow. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. And we'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.